This is going to be an interesting one.
Yes, this is a conversation that we both don't know a whole lot about. Cryptozoology, which is the study of unknown species. And I know that because I have a handy dandy encyclopedia of the paranormal that I use all the time to figure out stuff.
He was in there today, everybody.
I was in there today learning. And we have an expert who's going to be on today from Within the Mist podcast, Gary Brand, who's going to talk about cryptozoology, what it means, what he knows about it, and of course, his almost 3 years of his podcast.
We got Bigfoot, Sasquatch, Mothman,
Loch Ness Monster,
et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
So many things.
Yeah, so a lot to talk about. All right, so here is Gary Brand. Gary, how are you?
I'm fine and excited to be here. Thanks.
Well, we're really excited to have you here. And like we were talking before we went live, it's always great to cross-collaborate with other podcasters and people who are kind of in this supernatural world. And before we get to our specific questions about cryptozoology, tell us a little bit about Within the Mist podcast. What is it? Where can people find it? How long has it been around?
Sure. I mean, I've visited a Phantom House once before, but it was like really noisy with all the screams.
Nice.
Well, it seems that it was suffering from window pains.
Oh my gosh.
But I'm bummed.
We have dad jokes already.
Okay, wow.
No, but actually, my name is Gary Brand. With my wife, who usually has to suffer through the dad jokes, Goldie Ann, we have a weekly podcast called Within the Mist, and we share stories of cryptids, ghosts, and other mysteries, where I will tell the story of the urban legends of the subject matter of the week. And then we go through the pros and cons of what it might be and leave the answer of, whether the people believe into it at the end for the audience.
Interesting stuff.
Yeah. And, I like that it's, cryptids and ghosts and lore because, all that stuff is so interesting and ties back. I always think that all this stuff has to start with some grain of truth. That's how I've always been taught. And so I guess my first question for you is, Gary, are you a believer in cryptids? I mean, are they really out there?
Okay, well, to answer that, you have to look at cryptozoology in two parts.
Okay.
Cryptozoology is the science of discovery of unknown animals. Now, most people just think that that's just Bigfoot, hunters, and so forth. But actually, if you divide it into two parts, the first half is animals that are thought to be extinct. And, like dinosaurs and so forth. Well, we've actually have discovered animals that have been thought to be extinct. Most famously, the coelacanth fish, which was supposed to be extinct 35 million years ago. But a fisherman caught it and proved that it still exists. So that's one part of cryptozoology. That's proven. I mean, you can't say something's extinct if you're catching it in your fishing net.
Good point.
The other half of cryptozoology is the discovery of animals that we have never scientifically proven before. Now, yes, that includes Bigfoot, Loch Ness Monster, Chupacabra, but it also includes animals like the okapi. And if you're not familiar with what an okapi is, it's a horse-like animal that is very closely related to the giraffe because of its long tongue and so forth. And they even have one at Disney's Animal Kingdom. So this is an animal, the size of a horse that people did not know existed until it was actually discovered. Mm-hmm. The Highland gorilla. People thought that was a made-up animal until someone actually discovered it in the early 1920s. So we're discovering animals that didn't, used to, people didn't believe existed. So yes, I do believe that there are still going to be animals out there to be discovered. I mean, they say that we've spent more time on the moon than we have at the bottom of the ocean. So Lord knows what's down there. I mean, we've claimed that there's been the giant squid actually exists. And it's only been recently we've been able to video them.
Right. And I know it's, what is it, like we've only explored 5% of the ocean, if that. I mean, it's a very, very small number. So there's a lot of stuff we've never encountered, I'm sure. And
there's a lot of land we've never actually existed in. I mean, you hear on the news all the time, a tribe that has never been, a tribe that's been discovered that has never had contact with modern man. Yeah. So why can't there be animals that have never been in contact with, modern man?
That's true. I was watching, again, while I was researching a little bit about cryptids and cryptozoology, I saw a video about, and I think it was like from the 70s, but it was like explorers, I think it was like in South America, came across a tribe who had never seen a mirror before, and they're like showing them this mirror, and they're seeing their reflection and their reactions. It was just fascinating to see because, you know, I mean, the 70s, you know, I mean, that wasn't yesterday, but it's also not a million years ago, you know, so
And it's actually part of what we would call a technology era. We actually have movies and recordings from that time. So that's when we were able to start picking up, you know, these kind of things. I mean, you have where they've gone out to the different tribes and they're showing them pictures of Brontosaurus and they're saying, oh yeah, that's the Mobile Mobica. And so they're like, okay, you guys have actually seen this. This thing's a Brontosaurus that's supposed to have been extinct, you know, millions of years ago.
right.
So as we branch out, you know, how do these people know what a Brontosaurus is? Except they've seen one.
Right, right.
Yeah, really interesting. So how did you get involved in this, interested in this? Is this something you've liked as when you were younger, or like how did you end up being so immersed in this world?
All right. Okay. The easiest way to explain it is that I was a geek in high school, junior high. I am from the time when Dungeons and Dragons came out.
Nice.
And one of the coolest things about Dungeons and Dragons is that there's a player's manual, there's a dungeon master's manual, and then there's the monster's compendium. I love that book because, you know, it talked about dragons. It gave all the details about it. It talked about all these goblins and all these other creatures that I never even heard of. Well, I was reading about this one time in a library when the librarian came up to me and says, well, if you're interested in that, you might want to know that some of those creatures might actually exist. And it was at that time she gave me an encyclopedia from Lauren Coleman, which basically broke down all these different cryptids. And, you know, it was at the time where they were talking about Yetis, Chupacabras, and all of those. And the one that really caught my attention was the Mothman, because I'm from Ohio, and actually Point Pleasant, West Virginia is only like 2 hours away. So that was the one I really got focused on and did all kinds of reading on it. And it was so amazing that for 13 months, people saw it. Again, I mean, a whole town saw this animal over that time period. So, I mean, how do you claim that many people are liars?
Valid point. And it's funny, we mentioned, as we've been talking today, you know, the Mothman has come up. And there was a movie in the 90s, the Mothman Prophecies. I think that's really kind of what I know about it. I don't know a whole lot about the Mothman. So what's like the short history of what the Mothman is?
Okay. Well, Mothman is like such a big story. We actually had to do 3 episodes on it.
Okay.
The short version, John Keel, who wrote the Mothman Prophecies, went to investigate because people started seeing this creature. Now, honestly, when you read the Mothman Prophecies, his take on the Mothman is that it's an extra dimensional creature, something that came from not even another planet, but from another dimension different from our own. So it's kind of like a space alien, but not from outer space.
Mm-hmm.
When you actually look at the Mothman, there's 3 theories that you can look at. One, it is an alien from an interdimensional, like John Keel painted it out to be. 2, it could be an undiscovered creature, so a giant bird-like creature, which the U.S. has a whole history of, from even Pajaro from Texas, the Texas big bird, the Van Meter visitor, bat squatch, all these winged animals that the United States seems to have. In fact, Native Americans have the thunderbird, which could be the Mothman in theory. So that's the second one, is the cryptozoology. And then there's the third one, the one that I think is the most interesting, is that the Bible doesn't describe angels the way we think of angels, humans with wings. They describe them basically as freaked out, monstrous looking things that if you look at them, you'll get dizzy, your head will hurt, you'll get burns and so forth. That's kind of the same thing the Mothman was doing. So maybe the Mothman is the angel of doom.
You know, and it's also interesting to think, about, if we think about ancient people and how they're, not that they didn't have the ability to describe things, but their way of describing things would be different than how we describe them today, just because of the context. So it doesn't mean that they were wrong. They just didn't have the same environment or the same type of comparison tools that we have today.
Well, that's an interesting thing about Bigfoot. Did you know that Bigfoot originally, when it was in the newspaper articles back in the 1800s, he was never called Bigfoot or called an ape. He was called a wild man, a hairy wild man. So they basically described him as a man with long hair who basically was feral. And he was known to attack people or would be seen in the people. So they kind of treated him like he was a feral individual. That's because we hadn't discovered gorillas yet. Once we had gorillas and were in the newspapers and we had studied giant apes, all of a sudden Bigfoot became more ape-like. And that's because it was easier for us to describe what we were seeing, because he was more like an ape, and we actually understood what a gorilla or an ape was. So Bigfoot transformed from a hairy man to a Bigfoot. And now we understand interdimensions and, you know, physics and everything. We're all big on that, and teleportations and so forth. So now we're actually even describing Bigfoot as an interdimensional. You know, and a lot of people have pushed back on that. They want to keep him as an ape man, but, you know, we use interdimensional to explain why there's no bodies, why he appears and disappears, why people get sick to their stomach, you know, from ultrasounds and so forth. So yeah, as evolution, as our understanding of technology and descriptions, we've been even changing Bigfoot. Bigfoot's never been Bigfoot.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up the technology side, because, you know, I think because cryptozoology in its definition is a science of studying unknown species. I mean, it is a science. So science learns from itself. As we learn more things, we kind of understand more as we move forward. That's the whole point of science. I'm curious about Florida particularly. Like, what are the cryptids here? I've heard of the skunk ape, that it's kind of like a Bigfoot thing.
Bigfoot is our hairy hominid. And interestingly, there's actually the Miyaka ape photos. They have actually taken pictures of it, and it looks more like an orangutan than anything else. It's just a supersized orangutan. And actually, Gigantopithecus was a giant orangutan. Now, why it would be in Florida, I can't answer that. But there was a tribe here before the Spaniards even got here who warned people coming in of the Shell people, which were a reclusive giant tribe of Native Americans that, you know, the other tribes warned everyone to stay away from. And that could have been this Bigfoot. In fact, Ponce de Leon thought the Fountain of Youth was here because the Indian tribes that he met were so huge and so massive. He figured they had to be this size because of drinking from the Fountain of Youth.
Right.
And he was seeing, and they were showing him details of even bigger, you know, people. So he was showing them the skunk ape and the Bigfoot people. And Bigfoot might be why Ponce de Leon thought the Fountain of Youth was here.
I've never put the two together, so that's fascinating. And, you know, there's so much of, even though Florida is crazy crowded and we're all on top of each other, it feels like there's a lot of parts of Florida that are very rural. I mean, look at the Everglades, for example. There's so much. I'm not going to go in there looking for anything. But
well, and a lot of the Everglades is protected.
Right. So we can't go in there anyway, you know. So other than, you know, the skunk ape or this, you know, ape-like creature, are there any other cryptids that are usually associated with Florida?
There's one tragic story. Are you familiar with Pensacola?
Yes.
Okay, there's the Pensacola sea monster. And the story of that goes that there was a group of 5 friends who decided to go surfing one morning. I think it was in the 1960s. And so they went out in a boat and they were going to go surfing and boating and so forth. Well, the fog came in and they basically got trapped, where they basically had to leave the boat that they were on to try to swim for shore. While they were swimming, the one person heard the others screaming and saw a sea monster. And basically he was the only survivor because he grabbed onto a buoy. And his story, when he was actually found and rescued, was that his 4 friends were killed by a sea monster that dragged them under the water.
That's terrifying.
Yeah. Like you need any more reasons not to get in the water.
Exactly. You said this was in Pensacola or near Pensacola?
Pensacola. It's called the Pensacola sea monster.
Okay. You know, I think we like to think, those of us who live on this coast, like on the Gulf Coast, think that we're on the safe side of the water because all the scary stuff's out in the Atlantic. But obviously that's not the case if we have this sea monster. And obviously things can travel too, I would think.
Right.
So what are the theories around what that sea monster is? Is it a whale? Is it a Megdalon? What is it?
Okay. There's a lot. The most common theory is that he was suffering from hypothermia, and he just basically heard his friends drown, and his mind couldn't handle that his friends were drowning, so he mentally created the sea monster. Okay. If he actually saw something, there are a lot of things that could have been confused with it. Yes, whales are very common to get mistaken for that. Just the way that they put up one fin could be mistaken in a fog as to being a sea monster and so forth. But, it's kind of hard for anything to be mistaken as a giant snake-like head, that he drew. Doesn't look like anything else.
Do you find it, obviously you're super interested in trying to figure out what's out there and you like sharing the stories, but is also frustrating at the same time because sometimes we're so close to finding something or there's an eyewitness, but it's not quite what we need. How does that impact you as somebody who's so into cryptozoology?
To be honest, I don't mind if things don't get solved. Okay. We live in a world where we have to have answers for everything. We want to know why people act the way they do. Well, it's got to be the brain chemistry. It's got to be the way they raise. We have lost so much magic in our world. And I think that that's why people are so interested in the paranormal. It's magic that might still exist in the world. Right. Ghosts are not proven. People believe in them. And so that's still magic in the world. There might be, animals out there that have been undiscovered, untouched by man. That's still magic out there. Right. And we don't explain them. So I'm okay with that because I kind of like to know that there's still a little magic in the world.
Yeah. And, to your point, we do feel like we need to know everything. And, if we know everything, what happens to curiosity? And I love the curiosity in the paranormal world, whether it's cryptids, whether it's ghosts, whatever it might be. I wanted to shift back a little bit to the podcast and the stories that you share there. The ones I didn't get to listen to all 140 that are out there, but I plan to. I'm going to subscribe now. But the way that they're shared, are very, it's like a novel almost, the way you set up the scene and the way you do you do all the writing for those? And where do you get your source material from to build these worlds?
Okay. Well, I am a published author. I'll do a quick plug for myself. I have 3 books that are available on Amazon. They are inspired by actual events. And what I do is I dramatize what we do know. Mm-hmm. Unfortunately, newspapers, because they can't have all the facts, they're usually very short stories. So what I do is I take the 300 words that might appear in a newspaper article, and then I basically rewrite them to try and add the background information. They say, 3 people were sitting around a campfire when they saw a Bigfoot. Well, I add in the details of, okay, they heard the crickets in the night. They were enjoying each other's companies for the hours, and it lengthens them out. So I do rewrite pretty much all of the first part of our podcast to add dramatization or story format to our cryptids.
Well, and I love that because it sets a scene in a way that gives the listener kind of like a way to kind of envision what's going on. So I really think it's a cool way to kind of set the scene and then to kind of talk about the facts behind the case at the same time, like you kind of said. How would you describe your audience? Like, are these people who are investigator people? Are they into cryptozoology? Are they casual listeners, or kind of all the above?
Basically, we go to different conferences. Like we were just at the Great Bigfoot Conference here in Florida, and the people that come to our table who tell us that they're listeners and fans of the show usually are the ones that they want to know more, because they are very curious minded and they will go out and do their own research, and they have an appetite for every show. mean, that's why paranormal shows do so well and why cryptid shows do so well. And then they want to know even more, and that's what we provide them. And like I said, I put it in a story format so they feel like they're experiencing it as well. And once they've experienced it, then they're like, oh, I could see how this could happen.
Yeah, it becomes relatable and more tangible. Which I think
that's the kind of people we usually attract.
Okay, yeah. And if you are watching, I see there's several people on. Don't forget, you can drop your questions for Gary in the chat. I'm happy to ask those for you. I want to say hello to John watching from Indianapolis on Instagram. Thanks for tuning in, buddy. Good to see you again. That's one, again, like I said at the beginning of our conversation, is what I love about this is that it brings in so much diversity comes in to talk to anybody who is interested in the paranormal, and especially finding a expert in a certain part of the paranormal is hard to find, because there's so much. It's kind of a two-edged sword. There's so much information, but there's not quite enough information. You just kind of have to know where to look. So I know that you have a very in-depth resource of like how you want to present stories and what topics you want to share. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about that and how you keep yourself organized.
Okay. I'm constantly online or reading newspapers or hearing from people. Trust me, if you have a story to tell, please share it with us on our Within the Mist podcast. We have a Facebook page, we have an email and so forth. Share your stories, because what I usually do is I take a blurb of that story and then I put it in our little monster box. As you can see here, this is filled with index cards, and each of these cards is a cryptid encounter or a theming. And as you can, people ask us, how can you have over 140 episodes? Look how many cards I got. And this isn't, an all-encompassing collection of them.
Right.
And with that, I can take any card and then I would have a subject idea. Like, all right, here. Sorry, there we go. This is the humanoids at Tres Arroyos. In 1973, 3 mountaineers claimed to have observed a UFO in France while patrons of a dive bar as an elderly man was watching. The extraterrestrials were tall, seemingly friendly humanoids wearing green diving suits. Wow. So there's a subject area to go into. And then I have the source of, it was in Fate magazine. So, I mean, there's an incident in 1973 where 3 mountaineers ran into aliens while doing a mountain climb.
And it's so fascinating because all we really have is their eyewitness accounts, so obviously you build a story from there, but there's so many of those stories out there. And I'm having this, like I'm playing the original Men in Black movie in my head where they use like the tabloids to kind of say, oh, this is a real legitimate lead, we need to follow up. So this is kind of an out of left field question for you. What do you think about those kinds of publications, where that's just like Bat Boy and, that kind of stuff from the 80s and 90s? What is your take on those kind of things? Do you think there's any grain of truth to that kind of stuff?
Unfortunately, the tabloids like that, the Weekly World News, they come straight out and say that this isn't news.
Right.
And so they're very upfront that they made everything up. Now, again, they may have taken a kernel of truth and then they made it into the story. But, things like that, no. Now, there are others like Fate magazine. They take actual stories that, if for all intents and purposes are true. As far as the people who are telling them the encounters that they had or the pictures that they have, these are true as far as that they can prove. The thing is evidence is broken down into different categories. First, you have the anecdotal, which is where you talk to a person, you get their story, and then you try and base it on whether or not you believe that person. Generally, the more people who say it, or if they're a very credible source, it makes it more supportable. Just like if you were in a court of law. The second type of evidence is historical data, where you can see how far back this evidence has gone, and especially in newspapers and those kind of documentations. And then the third is your technology. What photos, what videos do you have? And then the last one is your physical evidence. Has there been footprints? Has anything been left behind? Bits of spacecraft. crop circles, anything like that that you can physically touch and determine if it was paranormal or not.
Right.
So when you put all 4 parts of that, that's what you try and use to prove if something was true or not.
No. You said you had a question.
Well, I do, but do you want to ask this one first?
Sure. We had a follow-up question in our chat about the Bigfoot conversation we had a little bit earlier.
Okay.
So we asked Terry's question, and thank you for watching, Terry. It's good to see you.
Thank you, Terry.
Curious what Gary's thoughts are on the idea that Bigfoot could be an alien race using multidimensional portals. Interesting concept. What do you have to say to that?
Well, like I said, we've evolved from wild man to Bigfoot to interdimensional beings. And that is kind of where a lot of scientists want to go. I mean, there's a lot of pushback against that because, people don't want to change what they are already used to. But it does answer a lot of questions. And in fact, there have been a lot of times where there's been crossovers of Bigfoot sightings and UFO sightings. Famous case in West Virginia in 1989, a family of 3 and 2 police officers saw a spaceship touch ground, and in the woodlands next to it, they saw 2 Bigfoot-type creatures. And they didn't know if the Bigfoots came out to investigate the UFO just like they did, or if there was a connection between the 2. And then there's the theory that, like in Skinwalker Ranch, which is thought to have interdimensional portals that allows beings to cross over from one dimension or another world back and forth. And that Bigfoot is an example of the dominant life form on another planet, just like people would be.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I like that theory, but I have one caveat to it. When we first started sending objects into space, we didn't send people first. We sent mice, we sent monkeys, we sent dogs.
True.
Why do we not assume that they wouldn't do the same? And if they were, testing out their technology and sending things out into space and sending it to us, why do we assume that, the Bigfoot is the dominant or the most intelligent life form they have? Maybe it's just their test subject.
That's fascinating. It's like if you were flying by Earth and you saw the Russian dog, the Russian cosmonaut, and you think that the dog is what overly populates the planet. So that's an interesting take because you only know what you know, and it's not a lot. So that's
and they may have been, and my theory is that maybe they sent Bigfoot to Earth because they do know that humans are bipedal, walking upright, doing the things they do. So they sent a life form that was very similar to us here to investigate us or to test out, living conditions here on their own. So that's their tests, explorers.
It's really interesting. You've obviously given them a lot of thought, and I love that. I love that your theories are so, they're well baked, shall we say?
Absolutely.
To use a baking metaphor.
Well, you do like to bake.
I do.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's really interesting. So I ran across something where it was I guess it was online or something, but anyway, it was each state had their unknown creature thing. So that's a terrible way to say it. What would you call it?
Their own cryptid.
It's okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. So is that true? Like, is there most famous cryptid for each state or
See this map behind me?
Oh yeah, the map of the U.S.
That is the cryptid map. Unofficially, most states have a cryptid mascot.
Well, that's what I was going to ask. Is it like the state bird or the state flower? They have their own cryptid too. That's really interesting. And what's the one for Florida? Wasn't it the skunk ape?
The skunk ape is technically our mascot.
Okay, so can you tell me more about the skunk ape? Because I'm so new to this that I've heard that, but I don't know what that is.
Well, as I was mentioning earlier, the skunk ape is pretty much Florida's version of Bigfoot. Okay. There are some differences in that he seems to be more orangutan by description, and he only has 3 toes, which kind of leads to the fact of, it might be, not from Earth, because we really don't have 3-toed life beings. Even, animals and dogs are usually 4 to 5 toes. And so forth. So,
and they're probably 4. So,
yeah.
And you said Mayaka, right? Which is not too far.
Yeah.
From
No, Mayaka is where the famous photos came from. Now, Lauren Coleman, who is amazing in cryptozoology, he is like, the go-to person during the 70s and 80s and 90s. He had an interesting theory that if the skunk ape is an orangutan or a chimpanzee or some other large ape, he might have been brought over by the slave ships. Because a lot of the slave ships, when they were picking up slaves in Africa, were also being given gifts of baby monkeys or baby orangutans, and then by the time they got here to the United States, they would have been big and they would have been problematic, and maybe they were, set loose. And, a colony of those could have developed in the different areas of the Southeast. So the skunk ape might actually be descendants or interbreeding of ship pets.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, and there's, like we said earlier, there's so much rural land in Florida. You look at the Ocala National Forest, you look at Mayaka.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there's a lot of the Everglades, and there's stories every year about these huge snakes that they find in the Everglades because they used to be somebody's pet and somebody let it go because they couldn't take care of it anymore, which obviously has turned into a big problem. But you think about two or three centuries ago of that happening and what could genetically develop. It's fascinating and a little bit terrifying.
Right. And that would also explain why the three toes, interbreeding causing birth defects.
Yeah.
So I mentioned each state has their cool cryptid mascot, right? So can you give us a couple of examples of ones that you think are especially neat?
Well, there are ones that have actually really stood out and became very famous, like West Virginia. Theirs is the Mothman. I mean, they actually have festivals of it. Iowa has the Van Meter Visitor, which was a pterodactyl type creature that was terrifying Van Meter, Iowa. And it looked like a giant pterodactyl with a light or a glowing fin on top of its head. And it's kind of they have a festival for it. So a lot of these civilizations, not a lot of these civilizations, a lot of these cities and states have embraced their icons and have done that. Now, you mentioned that someone from Indiana was listening. Mm-hmm. Indiana has the Busco turtle. This is a turtle that basically was the size of a Volkswagen that existed in the lake of some poor farmer, and he spent like 5 years trying to catch it. And just because of its size, he pulled in nets, he ripped through nets, he basically destroyed all the traps that they had. So he kind of became that town. Basically, everything is turtles there. Okay. In Alabama, there is a town that is known for Hugging Molly. Hugging Molly is a ghost who basically chases after kids who are out at dark, hugs them, and then screams in their ears.
Wow.
So it's kind of a warning, don't get caught out at night because Hugging Molly will get you.
Right.
So, yeah, and then so they've embraced that. I mean, there are restaurants, they have Hugging Molly on their sign, welcome to Hugging Molly country.
Well, and what's so amazing because there's such a great marketing opportunity with all of these, obviously. Mm-hmm. I know in Georgia, we'll go there every once in a while because we have family up there. I know there's a Bigfoot museum in Georgia is it Bigfoot or Sasquatch museum? I think it's Bigfoot.
Okay.
What?
Go ahead.
We always
save that question.
We always say that, we should stop by there and see what it's all about. So
yeah, like when there's on billboards as you're driving up through Georgia, and we're kind of like, we should stop, but we never have yet because we haven't made it that far yet.
Yeah. And Andrea is watching, and she says she always grew up with stories of the Jersey Devil. Would that be considered a cryptid or just another supernatural type creature?
Okay, I actually was stationed in Fort Monmouth, New Jersey, which is right outside the Pine Barrens, where the Jersey Devil exists. The original story of the Jersey Devil is that Ms. Mother Leeds was having her 13th child, and she didn't want the child, and in fact, it was causing her so much pain that she shouted, "Let the devil take this one." She didn't want it. So when the baby was born, it was born normal, but then transformed itself into having the head of a horse, the body, hooved feet, a long tail, and wings, and basically flew back up out of the chimney. So it doesn't really fall into being a cryptid because it's not really an animal. It's more of a demon, or more on the ghost demon side of paranormality.
Okay. That I had never heard that. I had heard about the Jersey Devil, but I didn't know that part of the story. And I find it interesting that the number 13 is so prevalent in that superstition, right?
Well, that's
very much
part of those. It's just part of stories whenever possible.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay, so I'm going to be that guy. So what's the difference in Bigfoot and Sasquatch?
Okay.
I'm sorry. That's how
No.
I know, Gary. I'm so sorry.
A lot of Native Americans have different names for Bigfoot. And so what we do, because we're lazy, we kind of combined all those versions into one, Sasquatch. So Sasquatch is kind of an amalgamation of all the Native American terms for Bigfoot. Bigfoot became our term mostly in the southeast, because that was the kind of prince he was leaving. So you're going to find Sasquatch is used more commonly in the upper northwest. Bigfoot's more common in the south.
Thank you.
So it's regional terminology is what it comes down to.
Yeah, but take into account that each region, other regions have their own versions as well. You have the Orang Pendak in Asia. You have the Yowie in Australia. They're all Bigfoot or hairy hominid creatures. So everyone, has their own versions of the names for it.
And the Yeti would fall into that too, right?
The Yeti would fall into that as well, out of Nepal.
So Kelly's, and we're going to wrap up soon, shortly, I promise. I know we promise not to keep you too long, but Kelly has an interesting question. So how can we differentiate between real cryptids and urban legends?
Scientific study. That's why cryptozoology is considered a science, because it follows the scientific method. Gather information, develop hypotenuse, test your hypotenuse, determine the viability of repeating the testing. So urban legends will fail that, because you can't create a hypotenuse that's provable off of an urban legend. You can off of an actual cryptid, because you'll actually get physical evidence. If you find a footprint of a Bigfoot in a swamp area, you go back to that area and you try and repeat it and find more evidence to support that. Mm-hmm. So that's the difference between cryptids and urban legends. But remember, urban legends were based off of something.
Yeah, they had to start somewhere. Something inspired them. And one of my, hopefully, maybe final questions for you is, are you I don't know what the right term is. Are you a cryptid investigator or cryptid hunter? Have you ever seen anything? What's your experience?
I always wanted to be the person to actually find a cryptid because I have a zoology degree. I had 20 years in the military as a veterinary care specialist. I had 12 years as a veterinary technician after the military. I've always been interested in animals, and I've always wanted to be someone who discovered some new species. That's just not how it happens. I'm the guy in the movie where the heroes are being chased by a monster or being terrorized by a ghost. And so they call somebody who, is in the back room of a museum or in the basement of a library. And he opens up this big dusty book that says, "Oh yeah, I know what that is. It's this creature that comes out every 29 years or something," and basically has the answers. So I consider myself a cryptozoology researcher. I'm the guy who basically, collect, like you said, my book catalog. This is Sam, my Great Dane, who wants to be on the show.
Beautiful.
Yeah, I'm the guy who collects all of the data so that when something like that happens, I can provide some kind of background information. So I'm the guy who's always in the library.
Okay. I like that. That's a very important role. And, those are always the heroes of those movies. They're the one that knows what's going on and how to beat it or how to catch it or something. So
yeah,
with the research. If you could see one or prove one of these cryptids, which one do you desperately want to be proven as a real living thing?
I would really like the Mothman to be proven to be real, but I don't.
Right.
Because, like I said, in my theory, he's a harbinger of doom. There's been sightings of Mothman in Chernobyl right before the nuclear breakdown. There's been sightings pretty much at many disasters, Chicago and other regions where there's seeing giant winged creatures right before a disaster. It would be great to prove that the Mothman was real, and maybe he appears before disasters. But then I don't actually want to be in the area when he starts showing up.
Right. It's not a good sign. And I wonder if he's shown up at some of my previous relationships. He probably has. It's like, this is a disaster, time to get out of there.
Was the giant winged creature the tip that you needed?
It's like,
Yeah, time to go.
Time to go.
I mean, okay, I'll do it. I'll do this one last time. This is the cry of the owl. The owl, as you can see on the cover, is a giant bat-like creature that existed on Java Island, and it was fine and dandy. Didn't bother anyone. It just collected fish in a local stream until we started industrializing Java Island as a shipping between the East and the West. That's when he started getting nasty. And so that's what my book is based on. And it would be neat to prove that there is this giant chimpanzee-sized bat, but it also means that you're infringing on his environment, and that never goes well when humans and wildlife combine like that.
Right. I mean, we see that all the time with urban sprawl. We're disturbing the wildlife, so.
Well, right. And if you prove it, then everybody's going to swoop in, and whatever that is, their life is pretty much messed up.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Mankind is the stopping point of most habitation.
Yeah, it's the King Kong effect.
There you go.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is really interesting. So I love when somebody is like an authority on their thing and has done so much work and research. And like Gary, you're clearly in that area. I think it's really interesting. So if somebody wants to get one of your books, where do they go? And then if they want to find Within the Mist podcast, where do they go?
Okay. I am a published author, self-published. So all of my books are on Amazon, which includes a dad joke book. So I have the paranormal dad jokes for the paranormal dad, and also 2 other books that you can buy on Amazon. Just look up Gary Brand as the author, and it'll pull up all of my books. Within the Mist is available on all podcast providers, so everything from Apple to iTunes to Spotify to iHeart. We publish a new episode every Monday, and I'll give you guys a quick sneak peek. Next Monday will be the Teke, a Japanese ghost that hunts down bullies.
Oh, we could use one of them.
Yeah, like a heroic cryptid. I'm a fan already.
Yeah.
We need more of those.
No, that's very cool. So you started, now that explains a lot, because everybody, if you weren't watching at the very beginning, you need to go back and watch the recording, because you started with some of your paranormal dad jokes and I did not know what you're doing. So can you leave us with one?
Okay. Since Bigfoot was kind of a favorite topic, do you know what Bigfoot's favorite snack chips is?
No. Wait a minute.
Now you guys are claimed to be great hosts. If a Bigfoot comes to your establishment, what kind of chips are you going to serve him?
I'm going through all the chips.
I know, I have too.
Okay.
I keep coming up with Cheez-Its, but that doesn't make any sense. I don't know.
Okay, what is it?
Well, make sure you guys have Doritos in stock, as in Doritos.
Nice. Dad joke. Perfect.
Wow, I guess we're going to have to get that book then.
We already
we can regale our guests with the latest paranormal dad joke.
Exactly. Brought to us by Gary Brand with Within the Mist podcast. Thank you, Gary, so much for chatting with us tonight. I learned a lot. I'm very interested in this subject now more than I ever have been. I can't wait to check out your books and, of course, do a little bit more research on my side, too. And, of course, if I have more questions about this topic, I now know who to go to. So I'll be shooting you an email if I come across those.
Absolutely. I love talking about this. And, yeah, if you don't stop me, this interview will go on for days.
Well, I think it's very cool. Thank you for sharing your expertise with us and your passion for this. It's always fun to talk to somebody who's really excited about their thing.
Absolutely.
And that came across very clearly tonight. So thank you for sharing that with us.
Yes. And thank you to everybody who tuned in and asked your questions.
Yes.
Great to see so many familiar faces and a few new ones as well. And of course, this will live on our YouTube channel as well as Facebook. So feel free to share it and come see us here at Phantom History House. We are looking forward to a very busy fall and hope to see you here.
Yeah, book your room soon. Thank you, Gary.
Thank you, Tim and Steve.